Chapter 13, Urbanization and Creating Livable Cities. There's not a whole lot to sticky note in this chapter. The AP test will ask you a couple of questions about city growth, and that's what we will focus on mainly. The case study is about Oregon, Portland, Oregon, and it created an urban growth boundary. Make sure you know what that term means. Basically means it created a boundary that the city couldn't grow out anymore, it would have to grow up. All right, so the definition of urban is a city that has more than 2,500 people, and rural is an area that has less than 2,500 people. Now, it might be considered a city if your city had 1,000 people. It's still a city, but we call it rural. So rural America are areas of less than 2,500 people. Urban is more than 2,500 people. So Santa Clarita Valley is urban. And there's stars here because this info is not in your book, but it is on the AP test. When people move from rural to urban, you end up with a decline in birth rates. When people move to cities, they don't have as many children. Now, part of that is because they're not farming, and they don't need as many children to help on the farm. The United Nations estimates that almost all of the population growth from now on will be in cities, will be urban. Suburban is a subset of urban. It's an urban area on the outskirts of a city center. We are suburban in Santa Clarita. The city center would be downtown Los Angeles or a couple of other places where there's a lot of jobs. The West Side, the Warner Center. A lot of people in Santa Clarita drive, including some of your parents, drive out of Santa Clarita to the city center to work. Turning the page, and this is under the section Urban Growth Has Often Been Rapid. And we have some reasons that people move to cities. People move to cities for job. It's pulling them to the cities. People move to cities because of wars and famine and environmental damage, degradation. It's pushing these people to the cities. People move to cities because of good health care in the cities, good education. That's a pull to the cities. So there's pushing and pulling into the cities. In the United States, we are moving from the north and the east to the west and the south. People are moving away from northern areas where it's cold, the eastern United States, to the western United States, California, Nevada, Arizona, Oregon, Washington. They're also moving south, Florida, the Carolinas. And that's how our population in the U.S. is shifting. On page 378, in the 1950s, we, in America, discovered the suburbs, or we invented the suburbs. So people started moving there. We have good cars that could drive you from your house to a city center. Suburbs were cleaner, less crowded, cheaper homes, less crime, good education. That's why people moved to Santa Clarita. What suburbia does, though, is it creates sprawl. So you have here, you have this piece of land that was farmland, and now it's turned into houses, and the houses are spread out everywhere. And it's created some environmental problems and some health problems, too. Here are the negative impacts of sprawl. And we now spend a lot of time in our cars, transportation. We spend a lot of money on gas, a lot of stress in our cars. All of that gas being burned to drive to work creates a lot of pollution, which can also create climate change. Health, stress, sitting behind a wheel instead of exercising, health problems, obesity. The next one is land use. It takes a lot of land away from wildlife, the sprawl does. Oh, also on this page, you need to know the #1 most sprawling urban areas, which is Riverside, San Bernardino, California is the #1. And the least is New York City. There's nowhere to grow in New York City. It's on an island. So it can only grow upwards, not outwards. And the last impact of sprawl is economic impact of sprawl. It costs cities a lot of money to run electrical lines, telephone lines, develop schools and libraries, all spread out. So it does drain economics. The next section, creating livable cities. You need to know the word municipal means having to do with a city. So anything that's a municipal law means a city law. A municipal library is a city library. So know that term. Zoning. We have zoning so that somebody can't open up a 7-Eleven in your neighborhood. So if something is zoned as residential, only houses or schools or libraries can be built there. And if something is zoned commercial, you can't live there. And sometimes they're mixed. So make sure you know your basic classifications. Residential, commercial, industrial. Those are your basic classifications. We have some mixed areas now too. On page 387, and this is under smart growth, we have here the basics of smart growth. Let me wait a second. All right, so smart growth is kind of an antidote to the problems of suburban sprawl. And so here's some of the solutions. Mixed land uses. Take advantage of compact building designs. Create a range of housing opportunities and choices. Create walkable neighborhoods. How about creating jobs actually where people live so they could walk to work? At the bottom here we talk about new urbanism, and that is part of new urbanism incorporates smart growth principles. New urbanism is a type of smart growth. It's a walkable lifestyle. You have restaurants, shops, and movies right next to where you live. So here's an example up here, and we have some of this in Santa Clarita on Town Center Drive. There's condos for people to live in, shops and restaurants, so they don't have to get in a car and drive. Also, there's places to work. Princess Cruises, there's office buildings, all in Town Center Drive, so people can work and live and have entertainment all within a walkable location. They're building a lot of these kinds of developments around LA and the United States. So our Town Center Drive is an example. Not only does it have the movies, but it has gyms and restaurants, condos for people to live in, offices to work in. And so that is a type of new urbanism. It's actually old school urbanism from the days before people had cars. But now they make it less crime, it's pretty, and it's a nice place to live. Make sure you know these graphs on page 389. You need to know that the energy use for automobiles is the highest, and the cost is the highest compared to these other methods of transportation. BTU is an energy unit, by the way. So cars use the most energy, buses use second. Commuter rail is like a subway. Heavy rail is like a big train. And then light rail is some of the metro trains that are in LA are considered light rail. On page 390, we have here parks and open space. So go ahead and make sure for your test that you understand why parks are important for people. Make sure you know that. Skip all the way to urban sustainability. And under here we have resource sinks. So urban areas, this is page 394. Urban areas are wealthier, and which means they use more resources. A resource sink uses more resources than it produces, uses more water than rain gives it, uses more food than it grows, uses more minerals, uses more goods, and so resource sinks end up with a big ecological footprint. Santa Clarita is a resource sink. And we have to import our water. We don't have enough rainwater or river water here. We have to have it shipped from Northern California in an aqueduct down here. We don't grow enough food. There's hardly any farms out here. It all has to be shipped in. We don't mine for much out here except gravel, and we don't have factories that make many things. A few things like Tom's shoes, but not very much. So we are considered a resource sink for these reasons. All right, here's a big long list. Positives and negatives for cities. So this is all cities, positive things of cities, and you have a big column of negative. Let's go through the positive. Positives for cities. Higher population density, which leaves more intact ecosystems outside the city. For example, in Japan, 35 out of 100 people live in Tokyo, which means it leaves lots of intact ecosystems and forests and wild areas for air and water purification and habitat for animals. That's a good thing. Here's negatives about cities. More waste, more pollution, and the types of pollution: air pollution, water pollution, noise pollution, which causes stress, light pollution, which blocks stars. It affects the poor people more, all of this pollution, which happens to be an environmental justice issue. Cities are considered heat islands because concrete traps heat, and so they're hotter than the surrounding countryside. That is not in your book, but you need to know it, and that's why there's a little star there. And that is all for Chapter 13.